It's been a year since the Japanese government slapped export restrictions on three key chemicals for IT products needed by South Korea's biggest tech companies. Tokyo then removes Seoul from its list of trusted trade partners. And the move came after South Korea's top court ordered Japanese firms to compensate the Korean wartime victims of forced labor. Since then, tension and tit-for-tat moves have severely strained bilateral ties, with low prospects for any significant improvement in the foreseeable future. Today, we discuss how the bilateral relationship has fared over the past year and where it's heading with Kim Byung-joo, professor at Hankuk University of Foreign Studies in Seoul, and Nancy SNOW, distinguished professor of public diplomacy at the Kyoto University of Foreign Studies. My first question to you, Dr. Kim. It's been a year since Japan imposed export curbs on South Korean firms, and well, they include the three key materials needed for South Korea's main cash cows, displays and semiconductors. So what impact have these restrictions had on South Korean firms over the past 12 months?
Well, Japan, as you mentioned, imposed export restrictions going to Korea on three materials, and they are all related to the semiconductors and smartphone making. And the first item was called EUV photoresist, and this is about it's a material that's used for etching the chip, semiconductor themselves. And what happened was Korean manufacturers of semiconductors, such as Samsung and so on, they quickly moved to diversify their import sources and switching their channels to companies in Belgium, Germany, and so on. But at the same time, more importantly, they have found ways to supply this material domestically. So that item, we saw very successful handling of the situation. Second material is hydrogen fluoride, and this one is used to clean the chips, semiconductor chips. And Korea again succeeded in mass producing the material within a very short period of time, 1 year, as you mentioned. So second material also is pretty much off the hook on the side of Korea. Third material is used for foldable smartphones, and the material is called fluorinated polymers. And this one also recently, Korea has succeeded in creating domestic sources of supply. So in all three items that Japan thought would be very important critical items for Korea's key exports that they restricted in terms of sending material from Japan to Korea, unlike what Japan intended, Korea had successfully managed to, deal with the situation altogether, and they found other alternatives. So Japan's strategy, I guess, fair observation is that that did not work in terms of, as we narrowly focus on this tit-for-tat exchange, if you will.
So maybe it did more good than harm, with the localization of key materials, the production, Well, Dr. SNOW.
Right, exactly. So what's important here is, which I forgot to mention, is it's rather Japanese suppliers who seem to have suffered a lot because Korea was such an important destination for their exports of these key materials, and there are reports saying that they have suffered a lot instead.
Oh, so while South Korean suppliers or manufacturers are seeing their revenues grow, the opposite is happening in Japan as they've lost business. Well, Dr. SNOW, South Korea took reciprocal action and removed Japan from its own whitelist, and there were also boycotts here as well against Japanese-made goods. How much impact do you think this trade spat has had on Japan over the past year?
Well, it's certainly been negative, and the relationship has deteriorated over the last year. I think we're missing the larger picture. Your lead story was about the strict national security law in Hong Kong. Seoul and Tokyo have an enormous opportunity to become closer. You have two countries, one democracy in Northeast Asia. And I would certainly love to see these countries work better with each other instead of this outdated tit-for-tat type of competition. Competition is good for the economy, for the regional economy, and South Korea has been able to come out of this faring better than Japan. But I think that there is this intransigent relationship that continues to sort of spur on the negativity when COVID-19 is giving us enormous opportunities Seoul and Tokyo could be part of the new gig economy, could be part of the new startup economies if they opened up more and cooperated together. So while it's very distressing to see what's happening in Hong Kong, it is also, through such a crisis, an opportunity for other places on the map. As I said, two open societies that have their differences, but that nevertheless have a very strong working relationship in so many other arenas.
Well, for now, unfortunately, it seems that the two countries won't be ending their conflict that soon. I mean, Dr. Kim, Japan said that it will start an anti-dumping probe into potassium carbonate imports from South Korea. And this appears to be a response to a South Korean court's plans to liquidize the assets of Japanese firms here in the country, which were involved in forced labor, to compensate the victims. Do you see the situation, do you see the tensions here escalating? And what do you think is possibly the strongest measure that Japan could take against South Korea?
Pessimists argue that actually situation could get worse. But the thing is, in terms of normative argument, as Professor Snow made a very good point of, I don't know whether these two countries can afford to allow the situation get further escalated here. What happened was, this is a long story, but recent movement was after the escalation of the situation last year. Towards the later part of last year, Korea's presidential office took a very difficult decision of calling off its decision on GSOMIA, the agreement of sharing sensitive military information with Japan. Initially, Korea made a unilateral move of discontinuing that system, and then later, at the end of the last year, it said it canceled its decision or put that decision on hold. And in response to that, we were hoping that Japan would come up with some kind of gesture that will show that Japan is also very much interested in improving the situation. But from the reports that we get here in Seoul, Japan did not make that corresponding move here, and whether it's going the other direction. Of course, from Japan's perspective, Korean government allowing Korea's court going this way of liquidating a Japanese corporation, that is enormously unfortunate, and the Korean government should not allow that situation happen in the eyes of many of the observers here. So this is overall tit-for-tat, and the situation itself, as Professor Snow mentioned, is enormously unfortunate, and it's a suboptimal totally. So we have a lot of variables that can make the situation even worse than what it is, but we know in terms of normative sense, we know we should not let that happen.
But unfortunately, as you said, not much to be optimistic about at the moment, right? But, well, Dr. Snow, foreign policy is inextricably tied to domestic politics, and Abe's popularity has dropped 11 points over his handling of the COVID-19 pandemic, among other issues. How is he faring in the leadership race right now, and what alternatives are there to Abe in Japanese politics?
Right now in a pandemic, we always look to the leaders that we're used to, and Abe can afford to have a drop in his numbers. There's been a lot of mocking of the video that he did back in April, and not really handling the crisis early on. But I think that he will fare well in the long term because he has this longevity. He's been able to make it further along than any other prime minister in Japan. So he's familiar, even if you're sort of poking fun at him, he's a familiar politician. I don't think the Japanese people as a whole want to risk too much in change at the top. I don't see a whole lot of innovation or vision coming from the Abe administration, but I think that we have to wait and see, including how Japan is going to reopen. Trade continues, but the movement of people that Japan has relied on, the foreign students, the internationalizing of higher education, the foreign tourists, that has been put on hold, and it is deeply impacting the economy. So as I said earlier, I'm like a broken record There are so many more areas of cooperation, and I would love to see the public get more involved in this discourse, because I think as a whole we want to get along together and work together to resolve the pandemic, but also trade problems, to talk about the future in terms of sustainability, protecting the environment, creating more peaceful alternatives for the region. It's such a vibrant region and it has so much potential. It's not quite living up to it yet. And I do see, though, if you could have a merging of the government with technology and innovation, this could be a real win-win option. So I'd like to hear Abe come up with some win-win options, not only for South Korea and Japan, but for the larger region.
Well, Dr. Snow, do you think that Abe is going to continue hitting out at South Korea amid his domestic struggles, though? He does have a few issues there. And I mean, do you think he's going to continue with that?
Well, he will at times. It is politically expedient for him to do that. He's done it in the past. He's quite predictable. So as I said earlier in my critique, he's not always that imaginative. And this time of global crisis requires imagination and creativity. So I often say we need to get beyond Abe. We need to get beyond the political leadership. If he wants to come along, great. But we have to really put our minds together and our hearts and really come up with some resolutions that will help us all. And I think Japan's brand as a nation is about being helpful to the world, creating products that the world likes and wants to buy, and also being seen more as a peaceful brand in terms of the current constitution. So we have to really wait this out. But I think that the public, even its evaluation of Abe, is a good sign, even if it's a little negative, because it shows that people are paying attention. And in a time of global pandemic, we pay a lot more attention to politics than ever.
And hopefully he will gear towards peace. Well, Dr. Kim, for now, South Korea has been pushing to reopen a WTO panel to settle the trade dispute between the two countries. And the WTO did say it will decide on this this month. So if this panel does reopen, then how would the settlement play out?
I don't know whether actually WTO is, mechanically speaking, in a position to review this case. They have sufficient panel numbers and so on. But it's all technical, mechanical issue there. But, many analysts believe that this should not go ahead as the way you just have described. Both countries should find solutions to this problem together, rather than going ahead with this kind of confrontational measures. And as I said, because Korea's damage as a result of Japan's, initial action has been limited, I think there is a weaker rationale behind going ahead with WTO panel process here. But we'll have to wait and see how things go. Here, what we need is, as Professor Snow has strongly argued, both countries working together to serve the interest of the people, Japanese people and Korean people. And what this escalation has done is just harming the interest of the people altogether mutually here. And that's a very unfortunate situation. Japan has lost its market for its beer export to Korea almost near to complete level. And it has lost big time in the Japanese auto exports here in Korea as well as other retailers have suffered a lot. And their tourism industry has suffered a lot. And so this is a losing game. And as Professor Snow has mentioned, both countries, a lot of analysts believe that will hopefully come back to its senses and find ways to go forward together in the direction of resolution, solution, and resolving the conflict rather than escalating the conflict.
And Dr. Kim, I mean, in order to do that, to actually resolve this very deeply rooted conflict, what do you think could be the first rational step?
Well, I guess we have a lot to say about what Japan should do, but here on the side of Korea too, this current Moon government has won a election big time in April, and it has a very strong control over National Assembly. So this is a good time to avoid emotional side of Japan-Korea political conflict and come out strongly with the leadership, with the vision of how to improve the relationship between the two countries for the better. Uh, with sharp focus on national interest, what Korea needs here. Is it Korea's interest to go on, continue to fight with Japan here? Is that the best option for our national interest? Or is it a much better, best option for us to work towards, improving relationship with Japan? And I think the government should have a clear vision about this, and this is a good time to make an argument to the people and persuade people here in Korea. And perhaps this is the timing to work for the improvement of the relationship. Because of the political circumstance here, I think Korean government faces a very, very good timing for the better.
Well, we're going to have to wrap up the discussion here, but it's been very insightful. Professor Kim Byung-joo at Hankuk University of Foreign Studies in Seoul and Professor Nancy SNOW, Distinguished Professor of Public Diplomacy at the Kyoto University of Foreign Studies. Thank you so much for joining the programme.
Thank you.
Thank you.
This is also where we wrap up the show today. Thank you for watching.